not to become partisan. However, we have two individuals who are Republicans for Compassionate Access here. Mr. Don Murphy from Cantonsville, Maryland, who I believe is a former state senator. Is that correct?
Rep.
Representative.
Maryland,
okay.
it's delegate.
Okay, and Penny Biannccio, state representative from Connecticut, also from Republicans for Compassionate Access. Appreciate our colleagues from out east joining us here and being willing to testify and come to Michigan. Appreciate your testimony on this issue. So,
thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, I'm a former Maryland State representative, party chairman, and delegate to the 2000 Republican National Convention. I ran for office on a Get Tough on Crime platform after my wife walked into an armed robbery at a convenience store near our home. I won election that year and was seated on the House Judiciary Committee, and needless to say, I was keeping all my campaign promises to get tough on crime. And I was also the lead sponsor, of Maryland's medical marijuana law. The Republican Party oath states that the best government is that which governs least, and that the most effective, responsible, and responsive government is government closest to the people. It's with those tenets in mind that Republicans for Compassionate Access supports the medical marijuana bill, House Bill 547, sponsored by Representative Lemons and co-sponsored by Mr. Chairman Delort.
it's fresh.
We're back east. We are a group of like-minded Republicans that believe that it should not be the policy of this or any other state to arrest, prosecute, and incarcerate patients whose only crime is attempting to alleviate the pain and suffering, with their doctor's approval, of pain and suffering caused by life-threatening illnesses. The Centers for Disease Control estimates that in Michigan alone, 48,000 new cases of cancer were diagnosed in 2004. For nearly 20,000 of your constituents, this diagnosis was a death sentence. This is why you cannot wait for the federal government to stop this war on patients. As representatives here in Michigan, it is within your power to protect these patients. And while it's true that state law like this does not protect patients from federal arrest, but it does protect them from 99 out of 100 drug arrests, which make this bill 99% effective. I might point out that after the Supreme Court ruling in the Raich case, Rhode Island passed this bill over the objections of its Republican governor, unfortunately, and overrode his veto. That was after the Raich case. So the Raich case does not affect your ability to pass this bill. It does not affect the law in the other states where it's become law. And this is not just about compassion, but it's about jurisdiction. Who should decide what's best for the people of Michigan? Legislators elected by Michigan voters or members of Congress from the 49 other states not elected from Michigan? And who should decide what's best for patients? Doctors, patients and their families, or politicians and bureaucrats hundreds of miles away in Washington? This issue is not, although we're here as Republicans, about politics, because the people agree. Voters in the blue states of Washington, Oregon, California, and Maine have all passed ballot initiatives. Voters in the red states of Alaska, Nevada, Colorado, and Montana have done the same. AARP polls 72% of seniors agree. And many religious communities endorsed our efforts as well, including the United Methodist Church, the Episcopal Church, the United Church of Christ, the Presbyterian Church, the Evangelical Lutheran Church, and the National Council of Churches. The science is on our side as well. Dr. John Benson, the principal investigator of the National Academy of Sciences, in the 1999 Institute of Medicine report, makes our case when he stated, "We concluded," quote, "we concluded that there are some limited circumstances in which we recommend smoking marijuana for medical purposes. Relinquishing your jurisdiction and arresting patients is bad public policy and bad politics. I look forward to a favorable report." And before Representative Biannccio testifies, I'd like to just briefly thank Representative Sheen for his very personal and candid comments. I might point out that this bill, unlike the situation you described, if, for example, your brother had gotten to a point, which I imagine he did prior to his death, when he could not go out and obtain marijuana on his own, and he had to depend on a caregiver or a loved one, such as yourself, if you were to have gotten arrested for possessing that marijuana for your brother, you would have been in a situation that, with all due respect, probably would have caused you severe heartburn come re-election time. And that is not the situation that you or anyone else should be put in. If you are younger and you're applying for a position, a job, any kind of a job, whether it be elected or otherwise, you don't want a marijuana arrest for any reason on your permanent record, on a criminal record. To be arrested, to be prosecuted, no matter what the case, that's a situation I think this bill would help avoid. So it would impact, it would have effect for a lot of people in this state, not just those who have cancer, but those who have other debilitating diseases. And I might also point out that in all the states where marijuana, medical marijuana has passed through ballot initiative or the legislative process, that the use by recreational use has dropped more dramatically than it has in the other states on average. So this is not opening up Pandora's box. It is not in the other states. I don't believe it would here. And I certainly believe that the people of Michigan are at least as compassionate as those people in the other states that have passed it by referendum or the legislative process. So, thank you.
Thank you.
That's close. Good morning, Chairman Drolet, and esteemed members of this committee. My name is Penny Biannccio. I'm a Republican state representative from Connecticut. I'm entering my 5th year there, coming up in January, and I am the human face of medical marijuana in Connecticut. I've been the co-sponsor of the bill since I joined the General Assembly in 2003. I'm here today because of my personal experience and my interest in passing effective medical marijuana legislation in all states in our country. I had a personal experience almost 25 years ago that prompted me to become involved in the efforts across the country to legalize marijuana, but only for medical purposes. When I was married in 1982, my husband was quickly diagnosed with terminal bone cancer, Ewing sarcoma, which is a fatal and terminal type of cancer. He was very ill. He had chemotherapy and radiation. He was unable to walk, and I watched him waste away and lose 80 pounds. Finally, the Veterans Hospital in Boston, a doctor pulled me aside and said, you know, you really need to buy some marijuana for your husband. I hadn't smoked marijuana, I had never done drugs, I knew I wanted a public career, and this was a terrifying moment for me. But as I watched my husband basically die in front of me, I decided that I would do it at any cost. For 3 years, I went out and I bought pot for him, and I watched his remarkable, extraordinary recovery. Not that he recovered from the cancer, but he was able to eat, he was able to laugh, and we were able to regain some quality of life. I've heard many of my colleagues in Connecticut say to me, you don't need to have this bill because we have Marinol and we have other drugs that work for this exact same instance. And I can tell you from the bottom of my heart that it's just not true. There are a lot of people in Connecticut, as there are in Michigan and across the country, that Marinol and other drugs do not work for. I know that you've had an opportunity to read all of the literature, and there are many doctors, hundreds if not thousands, if you go nationwide, that will tell you that marijuana is a drug that can work for certain people when other drugs do not. I generally like to just close by proposing that you think about this question when it becomes time to vote on this bill. And as Representative Sheen has candidly pointed out, most of us will at some point in our lives have an experience where we're faced with difficult decisions regarding medical intervention. I was forced to decide, would I watch my husband suffer incredibly, or would I make the choice of purchasing pot? And I made the choice that I think is compassionate and right, and I don't think that I should have had to face possible incarceration and other penalties. The bill before you would simply remove the penalties for people who are using marijuana under their doctor's supervision. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for coming over to Michigan to testify as colleagues. Representative Garfield has a question.
Yes, I have a couple of them. First of all, let me state that I am a life invitation. I have a double broken neck in the service. I have episodic events where my neuron is trapped, and the pain is excruciating. We have kind of a conflicting law in the state. I was stopped one time. I identified to an officer that I didn't take drugs. He asked me if I took drugs, and I said no, but I did have a prescription drug in the vehicle, but he asked me that. And I did not know if it wasn't in the prescription vial in the state that I was in contempt of the law, and I didn't know that. I would like to think how many senior citizens in this state do not know that. My wife had a stem cell transplant, was on chemotherapy. In 4 days, almost couldn't walk the length of that desk here in front of her. And she lost her appetite. It shrunk her esophagus. She could barely take a pill. And I've seen all this, so I truly understand what you're talking about. I had to go to my own physician to get letters from them about my degenerative spinal disease as well as my broken neck, and that I am authorized to take Vicodin, because I was afraid the officers in the state, that if I told them, they didn't care. It was not in the prescription label. So I have a problem with that, and I'd like to address that before I leave the legislature. But my question is to you, what did you do in Maryland or Connecticut or wherever you were at that protected those citizens that were able to obtain it? Did you do anything to protect them if they were stopped or something like that? And, you know, from those who are illegally obtaining it, I will tell you, my uncle died of prostate cancer. He owned a large engineering company, one of the biggest independent automotive engineering companies in the country. At the end, one of his engineers had brought him some. He had never had anything like that in his life. You know, he couldn't eat. All of a sudden, he was eating and doing things. Now, I was with a physician yesterday, and I asked him, he's like, "Oh, I heard they have a THC pill. I don't know what it is," but he said, "Yes, they do. I don't know. I've never taken it. I'm a physician." But there are differences in taking the THC pill and the other form. And this is the only way to say it. When I was in the service, they had a thing called the munchies, whatever that is. But it helps people to eat when they can't eat. And so I know that it probably prolonged his life. We didn't know it, but he was able to eat stuff that he could not eat. So I would like to know, what did you do in those states to protect those who were legally able to obtain it from those who are just out there, you know, to do whatever they want to do?
In Connecticut, it's still a proposed bill, but our proposal is that the person who has the legal right to use the marijuana has a card registering them with the Department of Public Health. If an officer should come to the scene and decide to make an arrest, he or she can do that, but the person can take the card after that to a court and present it to the judge. Then it would be up to the judge to interpret the different information, but the card would allow them to go to court with an affirmative defense. The officer also could just review the card themselves and decide not to make an arrest based on this looks like, you know, appears to be a valid state of Connecticut Department of Public Health registry card.
That's kind of the way it works around the country, although because states have done this through the initiative process, people draft up their own bill and basically, you know, get the signatures and put it on the ballot. So it sort of runs the whole gamut, but I would suggest you do just that. You have people, and I know you might hear some groans in the back because there are people who would rather not be on a registry. But if that's the only way that you're going to allow this to happen, is people get the card and then they show that. And quite honestly, in Maryland, one of the proposals was that if you were to use a card fraudulently, that the penalties for that possession were enhanced. So you wouldn't have the case where people would get the card, take grandma's card, run down the corner, get some for themselves, they get caught, that sort of thing. You don't want patients being used and abused in that way. And so maybe you find an amendment that would do that. But having the card, quite honestly, Representative, I think you have enough experience with this issue and pain that you understand where we're coming from. And quite honestly, if you have a relationship with your doctor and you trust your doctor to take care of you in your pain situation, if your doctor said, and this Vicodin's not working, you said the Vicodin's not working, is there anything else? And he said, well, and you continue down that road, and finally there's nothing else that works. There's nothing that works, and he says, well, if all else fails, try marijuana. You understand that. You understand that firsthand. I'll tell you, a year ago I broke my leg in 3 places out in Washington State where it is legal. And I said, well, the good news is I'm out here in Washington State, so if what you prescribe for me doesn't work, I guess I can, you know, and if the pain never stops, I can go across the line to Oregon where they have assisted suicide. We all had a good chuckle over that. I never did resort to using marijuana, but I'll tell you, the pain medications they gave me just didn't work. And I tried what you're trying, and, you know, it gets you stoned, and it doesn't necessarily do you any good. And there are people at end stage of life who don't want to be in a stupor. My father was so doped up on morphine that at the end of his life he couldn't have conversations with his family, and that was very unfortunate. And if there was something that would allow him to ease the pain and the suffering but still be lucid, then maybe that would be appropriate. And in this case, unfortunately, we didn't use that for him, and so it was a very difficult time. But I think the two of you have expressed personal situations that you understand what we're talking about, and I think whether you believe it or not, I think most of your constituents understand. They certainly understand your personal stories, and they have personal stories of their own. 40,000 new cancer patients a year are diagnosed in this state, and that's just cancer. So multiply that every year.
Follow up by Representative Garfield.
Yeah, let me just briefly state that I can't second guess what somebody would do with continued pain and suffering. I know I've been there, but I was able to alleviate it as I got better, but who knows when you're in a life-threatening situation in a degenerative state, what one person would do. I mean, to get rid of the pain, alleviate another. My next question is something really that you brought up, and that is, should there be a condition like that? Say, naturally I can't get it because I'm really debilitated, and I can't make it to a drugstore. So I send a relative or my mom with the prescription. How are they protected from being stopped or something like that? I mean, see, this thing is, it kind of reminds me of what Representative Dean said. I mean, I got on the internet and I looked up the California law and different stuff like that. You know, I certainly wouldn't want to, you know, I can see debilitative situations. I don't want people with stress having it. I don't want people with hangnails having it. I wouldn't want, you know, those kind of situations where the public is really protected and lawfully, and you know, that those who really need it would benefit from it.
In the states that allow this, you don't find too many doctors writing prescriptions or writing recommendations for this for people that don't actually need it. I mean, these are people who, in theory, could lose their license to practice medicine if the federal government came down and really leaned on them hard. Now, you do have a First Amendment right to put in a chart what you deem is the case for a particular patient. But this has not been a problem around the country where you have quack doctors, if you will, writing prescriptions or recommendations for these sorts of hangnails and headaches. Just, it's not happening.
I'm not going to get into the name because I forgot your name already and I know it's hard to pronounce.
That's okay.
What situation do you have where you live where, like you said, you know, your husband had that situation with bone cancer. So how would you protect, did you do anything to protect loved ones who would pick up the prescription and bring it back to the house so if they were stopped, that they weren't incarcerated or went through that problem?
Right. Most of the effective medical marijuana bills across the country allow the doctor to determine if a caregiver is needed. We are trying a more stringent bill in Connecticut. We are saying the patient doesn't decide if they need a caregiver, but if the doctor determines that a caregiver is needed, that caregiver is also registered as a caregiver with the registry. So that's how the protection is extended from you to the person who is assisting you.
Whether it's a loved one or an assigned caregiver?
It doesn't, it can be the person that is chosen by the patient.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for coming and making the journey all the way to our great state. And I want to thank you for your commitment, not only to this issue, but to public service, and you continuing to do so. My question has to do with the registry and your state. Though there's a confidentiality with the registry and it's not easily accessible, is that the case?
That's true.
Yeah.
Thank you.